Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of psychological suspense and existential dread that some viewers may find disturbing. There are paintings that capture a moment in time, and then there are paintings that capture something far more insidious. Something that reaches beyond the canvas, beyond the pigments, and into the very fabric of your future. Imagine a canvas innocuous at first glance, perhaps even beautiful, but one that holds a secret so profound, so utterly terrifying, that merely looking at it could seal your fate. This isn't just a piece of art. It's a mirror reflecting not your present, but your end. And for those who have gazed upon its surface, the image it reveals is not a possibility, but a chilling, unavoidable certainty. Sarah Miller had always been drawn to the echoes of the past. As an art restorer, her life was spent meticulously peeling back layers of grime and time, revealing the original brilliance of forgotten masterpieces. She loved the quiet hum of her studio, the smell of linseed oil and solvents, the silent conversations she had with artists long dead. At 28, she was considered one of the brightest young talents at Restoration House, a prestigious, if slightly quaint, studio nestled in a historic brownstone in Boston's South End. Her mentor, David Chun, a man whose hands were as steady as his temper was calm, often remarked that Sarah had a sixth sense for a painting's true nature. She could discern a forgery from a genuine article with an uncanny intuition, and her touch was as light and reverent as a whisper. One crisp autumn morning, a new consignment arrived from a sprawling, decaying estate in upstate New York. The owner, a reclusive old eccentric named Mr. Silas Thorne, had recently passed away, leaving behind a vast, chaotic collection of art and artifacts, most of it untouched for decades. David had won the bid to appraise and restore several key pieces, a major coup for Restoration House. Boxes and crates filled the receiving bay, smelling faintly of dust and mildew, each holding a potential treasure or more often a forgotten curiosity. Sarah was assigned the initial cataloging. It was tedious work, like sifting through a stranger's attic, but she found a strange comfort in it. Most of the pieces were unremarkable faded landscapes, stiff portraits of forgotten ancestors, still lives of bruised fruit. But then she reached a crate marked simply Thorne Collection Lot 7. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient packing straw, was a painting unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was a portrait, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, framed in dark, unadorned oak. The canvas itself was old, the paint thick and cracked with age, giving it a somber, almost oppressive quality. It depicted a woman, her features obscured by shadow and what appeared to be heavy layers of grime. Her eyes, however, even through the murk, seemed to possess an unsettling depth, almost as if they were watching Sarah, rather than merely being painted. There was an intense, almost palpable darkness emanating from it, a coldness that seemed to seep into the air around it. It wasn't just dirty. It was profoundly unsettling. "Interesting," she murmured, pulling on her white cotton gloves. "Another one for the mystery pile." She carefully lifted the painting out, placing it on a clean easel under the bright, focused lamps of her workstation. The initial assessment was straightforward. Oil on canvas, late 19th century, possibly European, but the style was peculiar, almost amateurish in some aspects, yet strikingly powerful in its overall impression. The dark varnish was so thick it swallowed most of the details, making it difficult to discern the subject's true expression or the background. It was a restoration challenge, certainly, but nothing Sarah hadn't handled before. She began with a gentle surface cleaning, using a cotton swab barely dampened with a specialized solvent. As she worked, slowly removing decades of accumulated dirt, something began to shift. It wasn't just the colors becoming brighter, or the lines becoming clearer. It was something more fundamental. The painting seemed to change as she cleaned it. The woman's face, initially a blur of shadow, started to resolve, her features sharp and angular. But it wasn't the woman's face that truly captured Sarah's attention. It was the background. Beneath the grime, a scene began to emerge. It was a dimly lit room, filled with what looked like antique furniture. A flickering gas lamp cast long dancing shadows. And in the foreground, half hidden by the woman's shoulder, was a figure. A man. His back was mostly to the viewer, but Sarah could make out the distinctive curve of his shoulders, the specific cut of his dark blazer. A peculiar detail caught her eye. A small, almost imperceptible tear in the fabric of his left sleeve near the cuff. A shiver ran down her spine. The man in the painting, even from behind, looked disturbingly familiar. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The man was sitting at a large, ornate desk, his head bowed. On the desk, scattered amongst papers, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a piece Sarah recognized instantly. It was a gift she had given to David Chun for his birthday just last month, a tiny hand-painted robin. Her heart began to pound with an unnerving rhythm. This couldn't be right. This was a painting from the late 19th century. David Chun, her mentor, was a man in his late 50s, living in Boston in the 21st century. The anachronism was jarring, impossible. She wiped another section, her hand trembling slightly. The scene became clearer, sharper, almost painfully vivid. The man David seemed to be struggling. His shoulders were hunched, his hands pressed to his temples. And then a detail that made her stomach clench with cold dread. A dark, viscous stain spreading across the white shirt collar visible above his blazer. Blood. David Chun, her mentor, dying. In a room that looked like his study, with the wooden robin she had given him. Sarah stumbled back from the easel, knocking over a tray of brushes with a clatter. Her mind reeled, grappling with the impossible image. It was just a painting, an old dusty painting. Her imagination was playing tricks on her. The light, the solvents, the fatigue that had to be it. She took a deep, shuddering breath and forced herself to look again. The image was still there, unwavering. David slumped over his desk, blood staining his shirt. The flickering gas lamp. The wooden robin. Every detail chillingly specific. She tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the painting had been altered. A modern forgery cleverly superimposed onto an old canvas. But the paint was old, the cracks consistent. It was authentic. The image she saw was embedded within the original layers. For the rest of the day, Sarah couldn't shake the horrifying image. She tried to focus on other tasks, but her eyes kept darting back to the ominous canvas. She even considered telling David, but how could she? "I cleaned a painting today, and it showed you dying in your study." He'd think she was losing her mind. The next morning, the news hit Restoration House like a physical blow. David Chun hadn't shown up for work. His phone went straight to voicemail. Worried, his wife, Emily, had gone to check on him. She found him in his study, slumped over his antique desk. He had suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage during the night. He was gone. And on his desk, clutched in his lifeless hand, was the small, intricately carved wooden robin. Sarah stood frozen, the phone receiver cold against her ear, Emily's choked sobs echoing in her mind. The air in the studio suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. Her gaze, against her will, drifted to the dark painting on the easel, still waiting for her touch. The image of David, exactly as she had seen it, seemed to solidify, to deepen, to mock her with its terrifying accuracy. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't her imagination. The painting knew. It had shown her David's death. And now a cold, unyielding dread began to settle in her bones. If it showed David's death, what else could it show? What if someone else looked at it? What if she looked at it again, and this time the reflection staring back was her own final moment? The painting wasn't just old art. It was a terrifying, living prophecy, and Sarah had just become inextricably tangled in its dark, deadly secret. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her mind reeled, grasping for any logical explanation, any way to dismantle the horrifying truth that had just unfurled before her eyes. It had to be a trick of the light, a figment of her overactive imagination, a bizarre hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the unnerving aura of the old gallery. Paintings didn't do that. They didn't show the future, let alone the chilling, precise moment of someone's demise. Yet, the image of the man, the distinct moment of his final breath, was seared into her memory with an undeniable clarity. And the thought of it shifting, morphing to reveal her own end, the very idea sent a tremor of icy dread through her veins. She paced her small apartment, the antique canvas now leaning against a wall in her living room. Its ornate frame a silent, menacing presence. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old building amplified, turning her familiar sanctuary into a cage of creeping paranoia. She tried to tell herself it was just a painting, a beautiful, albeit unsettling piece of art she'd paid a small fortune for. But the cold, hard fact remained. She had seen it change. She had witnessed the impossible. Sleep was a distant luxury. Sarah spent the night wrestling with her fear, her mind cycling through frantic possibilities. If the painting did show the viewer's death, then what was she to do? Look away forever? Destroy it? And what if the mere act of having seen it, of owning it, had already sealed her fate? The questions gnawed at her, sharp and relentless, leaving her drained but wide awake as dawn painted the sky in hues of gray and rose. By morning, a desperate resolve had taken root. She couldn't live with this uncertainty, this gnawing doubt. She had to know. She had to test it. But how? And who? The thought of asking someone else to look, to potentially expose them to such a horrifying vision, was unthinkable. This burden, this terrifying secret, felt uniquely hers. She approached the painting cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. The canvas seemed to absorb the muted morning light, its dark hues now appearing almost hungry. She remembered the gallery owner's words, the careful way he'd handled it, the subtle warning in his tone. Had he known? Had he simply chosen to remain silent, passing on the cursed relic to an unsuspecting buyer? Sarah took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the painting. It depicted a somber, forested landscape, the trees gnarled and ancient, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards a perpetually cloudy sky. In the foreground, a lone winding path disappeared into the gloom. It was beautiful in a haunting way, but utterly devoid of any human presence or discernible narrative. It was just a landscape. She stared, willing it to change, half terrified it would, half terrified it wouldn't. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Nothing. The landscape remained fixed, unyielding. Her pulse began to slow, a sliver of relief piercing through her fear. Maybe it had been a trick. Maybe her mind had conjured the image in a moment of heightened anxiety. Maybe she was just losing her mind. But then a chilling thought pricked her. What if it wasn't a constant, always-on prophecy? What if it was more subtle, more selective? She remembered the man in the gallery, how he had stood before it, seemingly lost in thought, before recoiling sharply. And then the vision she'd seen. It wasn't a static image, but a fleeting, vivid moment. With renewed trepidation, Sarah leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. She focused not just on the painting itself but on the space within it, as if trying to peer through a veil. And then it happened. A subtle shift, a ripple not of paint but of perception. The winding path in the painting seemed to twist, to deepen, and for a fleeting instant, a form began to coalesce at its bend. It wasn't a full figure, not like the man she'd seen before. This time it was a silhouette, indistinct and shrouded in shadow, yet undeniably human. It stood still for a moment, then seemed to turn, its head lifting slowly. Sarah felt a cold dread spread through her. The silhouette was looking directly at her. And as it did, the surrounding forest seemed to close in, the darkness intensifying, swallowing the light. The air in her apartment grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. She gasped, stumbling back, clutching her chest. The vision vanished, leaving only the somber landscape. But the impact remained. It wasn't a full scene, not yet. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that the painting was indeed alive, responsive, and terrifyingly aware. It wasn't just showing a death. It was showing her something. Something that was waiting. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She needed help. She needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss her as delusional. Her mind immediately went to Emily, her best friend since college. Emily was grounded, practical, but also fiercely loyal and open-minded enough to listen, even to the most outlandish claims. Later that day, Sarah found herself pouring out the unbelievable story to Emily over lukewarm coffee, her voice hushed and trembling. Emily listened, her brow furrowed in a mixture of concern and disbelief, occasionally interjecting with a disbelieving "no way," or "are you serious?" "I know how it sounds, Em," Sarah pleaded, running a hand through her hair. "Crazy. Insane. But I saw it. Twice. The first time it was a man I'd never seen before, clear as day. The second time it was just a shadow, but it felt like it was waiting for me. Like it was my shadow." Emily took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze thoughtful. "Okay, let's break this down. You bought an antique painting. You look at it and you see someone else's death. Then you look at it again and you see a shadow that feels like yours." "It's more than that," Sarah insisted, leaning forward. "It's like the painting knows you're looking. It responds. And it's showing me glimpses. I don't know what it means, Emily. Is it a warning? Is it a prophecy? Can I change it?" Emily put her cup down. "Look, I believe you saw something, Sarah. Your eyes don't lie, and you're not the type to make this stuff up. But a painting that shows your death? That's straight out of a horror movie. Have you tried researching it? The painting itself, I mean, its history, its artist, where it came from. A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah. Research. Of course. There had to be an explanation, a legend, a folklore attached to such an object. No, not really. I just admired it, bought it. The gallery owner, Mr. Peterson, he was a little odd, but he didn't say anything specific, just that it was a unique piece, very old. Well, that's our starting point, Emily declared, pulling out her phone. What's the full title? The artist's name. Sarah retrieved the sales receipt from her bag. It's called The Shrouded Path. The artist is listed as anonymous, 18th century. Mr. Peterson said they couldn't trace the exact hand, but the style was distinctly Northern European. Emily typed furiously, her fingers flying across the screen. Sarah watched anxiously, her heart thrumming with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about understanding a terrifying phenomenon. Okay, The Shrouded Path, anonymous 18th century. Emily mumbled, her eyes scanning the results. Not much immediately. A few auction records, mostly small regional ones. No major art historical entries. Wait, this is interesting. She turned the phone to Sarah, pointing to a small, obscure blog post. The title read, Whispers of the Veiled Canvas, Forgotten Legends of European Art. It's not a major source, probably just some art enthusiast's blog, Emily explained, but it mentions a painting with a similar description. The Shrouded Path, a landscape supposedly painted by an unknown artist in a remote village in the Black Forest region of Germany. Legend has it, the painter was obsessed with death and imbued his works with a dark energy. Sarah felt a cold wave wash over her. The Black Forest? That sounds ominous. It gets better, Emily continued, scrolling down. The blog post claims that this particular painting, The Shrouded Path, was rumored to have a peculiar effect on its viewers. It was said to show them not just a path but their path, and at the end of it, a reflection of their ultimate fate. Sarah stared at the screen, her blood running cold. It wasn't just a legend. It was a precise description of what she had experienced. The blog post, though amateur, was echoing her terrifying reality. It also mentions a string of disappearances and unexplained deaths associated with the painting's early owners. Emily read aloud, her voice dropping to a serious tone. One noblewoman reportedly went mad, claiming the painting was calling to her. Another owner, a wealthy merchant, was found dead in his study, staring at the canvas, with no apparent cause of death. The blog speculates that the painting doesn't just show death. It somehow causes it, or at least accelerates it. The coffee shop, once a comforting haven, now felt oppressive. The mundane clatter of cups, the murmur of distant conversations, all faded into a dull background hum. Sarah felt a horrifying certainty bloom in her chest. This wasn't just a vision, it was a curse. A living, breathing entity that had chosen her, and was now slowly, methodically, revealing her end. The shadow in the painting, the one that had turned and looked directly at her, now seemed less like a premonition and more like an invitation. An invitation to her own shrouded path. The air in Sarah's loft became a thick, suffocating blanket, pressing in on her from all sides. The invitation, if that was truly what it was, felt less like a choice and more like a sentence. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow, as her eyes remained glued to the canvas. The shadow. It was still there, unwavering, yet somehow more pronounced, more present. She stumbled back, knocking a small end table, sending a stack of magazines scattering across the polished wood floor. The clatter was a sharp, unwelcome intrusion into the terrifying silence that had enveloped her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding escape. This wasn't just a painting. It was a mirror reflecting a future she desperately wanted to unsee, a dark prophecy unfolding before her very eyes. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She couldn't stay in the same room as it, not for another second. Her gaze darted around, searching for anything, a blanket, a sheet, something to throw over the cursed image. Her hands trembled as she snatched a thick, velvet throw from the back of her sofa, its familiar texture doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. With a desperate lunge, she flung it over the painting, obscuring the ominous scene, plunging the canvas into temporary darkness. But the relief was fleeting. The presence lingered, a heavy weight in the room, radiating from beneath the velvet. It was as if the darkness had only intensified its malevolent energy, making it more palpable, more oppressive. Sarah could almost feel the shadow figure on the canvas, now cloaked in black, still watching her, still inviting. She backed away slowly, her eyes wide, scanning the room as if expecting the shadow to materialize from the corners, to step out from behind the veil. Her mind raced, a chaotic jumble of fear, disbelief, and a desperate need for answers. What was this painting? Where had it come from? Why her? Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind outside her window, seemed to echo the silent dread emanating from the covered canvas. She spent the night huddled on her sofa, a cup of cold, untouched tea beside her, staring at the shrouded form. The velvet throw seemed to subtly undulate, almost breathing in the dim light of dawn. It was her imagination, she told herself, a product of her exhaustion and terror. But the thought offered no comfort. By morning, a new resolve began to harden within her. Fear alone wouldn't solve this. She needed to understand. She needed to fight back, or at the very least, understand what she was fighting. The first step, she decided, was to remove the painting from her sight, to break its hold. With renewed, albeit shaky, determination, she approached the canvas. She gripped the edges of the heavy frame, intending to turn it face first against the wall. But as her fingers brushed the polished wood, a strange sensation washed over her. Not a physical resistance, but a profound, almost magnetic pull. It was as if the painting itself was rooted to the wall, or perhaps rooted to her. A strange, irrational reluctance seized her, a whisper in her mind that told her to look, to not turn away. She fought against it, gritting her teeth, pulling with all her might. The frame wouldn't budge. Or rather, she wouldn't let it budge. A cold sweat slicked her palms. This wasn't just about weight, it was about will. Her will, pitted against something she couldn't comprehend. She felt a strange, almost maternal protectiveness towards the object of her terror. A bizarre sense that she couldn't simply abandon it. It was like a part of her, unwelcome and terrifying, but undeniably hers. Frustration mingled with her fear. She paced the loft, her thoughts racing. She needed help. She couldn't unravel this alone. Her mind immediately went to Emily, her best friend since college. Emily was practical, grounded, a firm believer in logic and reason. She would either laugh Sarah out of her apartment or, more likely, offer a sensible, non-supernatural explanation for Sarah's unraveling sanity. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed Emily's number. It rang twice before Emily's cheerful voice answered, a stark contrast to Sarah's own panicked state. "Hey Sarah, everything okay? You sound a little breathless." I need you to come over," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something's happened. It's about the painting." A beat of silence on the other end. "The one you were so excited about? The creepy one from David's gallery? What about it? Did you hang it crooked? Spill coffee on it already?" Emily's tone was light, teasing. "No, it is not that. It's showing me things. Horrible things. My death." The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, sounding utterly insane even to her own ears. Another longer silence. Then Emily's voice, now laced with concern. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Are you feeling okay? You've been working crazy hours lately. Maybe you're just stressed." "No," Sarah insisted, her voice cracking. "I know how it sounds, but I swear I'm not crazy. You have to see it. It's changing, Emily. The shadow, it looked at me. It's showing me how I die." Emily sighed, a sound of weary patience. "Okay, deep breaths, S. I'm coming over. But if this is some elaborate prank because I beat you at Scrabble last week, I swear. It's not a prank, Em. Please just hurry." The next hour felt like an eternity. Sarah sat glued to her sofa, eyes fixed on the velvet-covered painting, a silent sentinel of dread. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch and writhe, every mundane sound amplified into a sinister omen. When Emily finally arrived, her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a worried frown as she took in Sarah's pale face, bloodshot eyes, and disheveled appearance. "Wow, you really do look like you've seen a ghost. Or, worked a triple shift." "It's worse than a ghost," Sarah whispered, gesturing vaguely towards the shrouded canvas. "It's a premonition." Emily's gaze followed Sarah's to the covered painting. "Okay, lay it on me. What exactly is this premonition painting doing?" Sarah recounted the entire chilling experience, From the moment she first felt the unsettling pull of the painting, to the slow reveal of the shadow figure, to its unnerving turn and direct gaze. She described the chilling sensation of recognition, the feeling that the painting had chosen her, that it was actively showing her glimpses of her own demise. She spoke of the impossible details, the shifting landscape, the undeniable sense of being watched. Emily listened, her expression a mix of skepticism and growing concern. She walked over to the covered canvas, reaching out a hand, then hesitating. "So, you're saying this painting, which by the way looks pretty normal from here, is like a crystal ball of doom specifically for you?" "Yes. Don't you feel it? That the presence?" Sarah pleaded, desperate for validation. Emily slowly reached out and pulled back a corner of the velvet throw. The painting was revealed, bathed in the soft morning light. To Emily's eyes it was a dark, moody landscape, a lone figure shrouded in mist, a path winding into an ominous, distant forest. Nothing overtly terrifying, nothing supernatural. "It's certainly atmospheric," Emily conceded, her brow furrowed. "And yeah, a little creepy. But I don't see anything moving. No shadows looking at me, no paths changing." She stepped closer, examining the brushstrokes. "It's a very skilled piece, I'll give you that. But are you absolutely sure you're not projecting? You mentioned how stressed you've been." "I know what I saw, Emily," Sarah insisted, her voice tight with frustration. "The shadow, it was just a blur at first. Then it became clearer and it turned. It turned and looked at me. And the path, it twisted like a broken bone." Emily sighed, her gaze softening with sympathy. "Look, I believe you believe it. But sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we're tired or anxious. Maybe it's an optical illusion in the paint or the light. Artists are masters of suggestion." She paused, then added gently, "Have you considered talking to a therapist? Or maybe just getting rid of the painting?" "I tried to move it," Sarah confessed, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't. It felt stuck. And something in me, something wouldn't let me turn it around. It's like it wants me to see it." Emily raised an eyebrow, a hint of unease finally creeping into her expression. "Okay, that's weird. It's not bolted to the wall, is it?" She stepped forward, reaching for the frame. "Let's try together. If it's really that heavy, we can at least turn it face first for now." Together, they gripped the heavy wooden frame. Sarah felt the familiar, inexplicable pull, but with Emily's presence, she pushed past it. They strained, muscles tensing, but the painting remained stubbornly in place. It wasn't just heavy, it felt immovable, as if it had become an integral part of the wall itself. "Whoa!" Emily grunted, pulling her hands away, rubbing her wrists. "That's unexpectedly solid. Are you sure it's not secured to a stud or something?" She tapped the wall, listening. "Doesn't sound like it." As Emily spoke, Sarah's eyes were drawn back to the painting. It was subtle, so subtle she almost missed it. But the shadow figure, previously just a dark, indistinct form, now held something in its hand. A small, almost imperceptible object, glinting faintly in the morning light. It looked like a key, a very old, ornate key, barely visible within the swirling mist. "Emily," Sarah breathed, her voice a strained whisper. "Look." Emily leaned in again, peering at the canvas. "Look at what?" "The creepy mist? The even creepier shadow man. His hand. He's holding something. A key." Emily squinted. "I don't see it, It's just shadow. Maybe your eyes are playing tricks on you in this light." But Sarah knew what she saw. The key was there, distinct and horrifyingly clear to her. And as she stared, the shadow in the painting seemed to shift, its head tilting almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging her discovery. The mist around the key seemed to thin, making it even more prominent, more significant. It was as if the painting was actively responding to her attention, revealing another piece of its chilling puzzle. "I need to know where this painting came from," Sarah declared, a new kind of fear, colder and sharper than before, settling in her gut. David sold it to me. He has to know something." Emily, still skeptical but now genuinely concerned by Sarah's intensifying distress, nodded slowly. "Okay, that's a good idea. He's an art dealer, he'd know the provenance, the artist, all that jazz. Maybe there's some kind of legend about this particular piece. Or maybe," she added, trying to inject a note of normalcy, "it just needs a proper wall anchor." Sarah ignored the last part. Her mind was already racing, connecting the dots. The painting wasn't just showing her death. It was guiding her towards it. The key in the shadow's hand felt like a direct command, an instruction, a chilling invitation to unlock her own shrouded path. She had to call David. Now, the phone felt heavy in Emily's trembling hand. Each digit she pressed a tiny act of defiance against the cold dread seeping into her bones. David answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, calm anchor in the storm raging inside her head. "Hey everything okay? You sound breathless." "David, it's not okay. It's worse. So much worse," she blurted, her words tumbling over each other. "The painting. It's not just showing my death. It's telling me how to get there. It's a map. A set of instructions." A pause on his end, a beat of silence that felt like an eternity. "Instructions? Emily, what are you talking about? Are you sure you're not just overthinking this? The stress, the lack of sleep?" "No. Listen to me," she insisted, her voice rising with a frantic edge she couldn't control. "The shadow, the one in the painting holding the key. I told you about it, but I didn't see it properly before. It's not just a key. It's the key, a specific one. It's pointing to something, David. It wants me to find it." She could practically hear him rubbing his temples. "Okay, slow down. A key. What kind of key? Like a car key? A house key?" No. It's old. Ornate. A skeleton key, maybe? But with a very distinct head like a stylized M or something. It's hard to make out perfectly, but it's there. And it's in the shadow's hand, almost like it's being offered. Or demanded. Emily paced her small living room, her eyes darting between the phone and the ominous canvas. "It's a command, David. I know it. It wants me to unlock something. Something that leads to that." The that hung heavy in the air between them, the unspoken horror of her painted demise. "Emily, you need to calm down." "I'm coming over," David said, his voice now laced with genuine concern. "Just sit tight. Don't touch anything. Don't do anything rash. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. Emily tried to obey his instructions, but her mind raced, replaying every detail of the painting, every fleeting glance at the menacing key. She felt a profound sense of sickening inevitability, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by an unseen, malevolent hand. The painting wasn't just a prophecy, it was a trap, and she was already caught. When David arrived, his face was a mixture of worry and a determined attempt at composure. He took one look at Emily's pale, drawn face and the haunted look in her eyes, and all his earlier skepticism seemed to evaporate. He went straight to the painting, his gaze fixed on the shadowy figure. "Show me," he said, his voice low. Emily pointed, her finger tracing the faint outline in the canvas. "There. See, the way it's held. It's almost glowing, even though it's part of the shadow. It's not just a random detail. It's deliberate." David leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right. It's incredibly detailed for something so subtle. A bronze patina, I think. And the head? It does look like a letter, or maybe a symbol, an intricate design, almost like a crest." He squinted. "It's not an M though, more like a stylized intertwining of vines, or perhaps two serpents devouring their tails." The description sent a fresh wave of chills down Emily's spine. Serpents devouring their tails, an Ouroboros, an ancient symbol of cyclic renewal or infinity. But in this context it felt like an endless, inescapable loop. "So what does it unlock?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "My fate." David straightened, turning to face her. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's assume for a moment that you're right, that this key is real and it's important. Where would you keep a key like that? An old, ornate one?" They began to search methodically at first, then with increasing desperation. Emily's tiny apartment, usually a haven of cozy familiarity, now felt like a labyrinth of potential clues and hidden dangers. They checked every drawer, every box in her closet, under the sofa cushions, behind books on shelves. They pulled out old photo albums, ransacked her grandmother's antique jewelry box, a sentimental keepsake Emily had inherited, but found nothing resembling the distinct key from the painting. "Think, Emily," David urged, sifting through a pile of forgotten college textbooks. "Did your parents or grandparents ever talk about a specific family heirloom key? A key to an old chest, a secret compartment, a property they once owned?" Emily racked her brain, memories flickering like dying candles. Her childhood had been mostly normal, devoid of ancient family secrets or mysterious artifacts. Her parents were pragmatic, her grandparents even more so. The only mystery had been her grandmother's penchant for collecting porcelain thimbles. Nothing, she sighed, collapsing onto the sofa, defeated. No hidden compartments, no secret attics. We lived in pretty standard suburban houses. No grand estates with secret passages. David sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Okay, let's look at it another way. What if it's not a key to a physical lock? What if it's a symbolic key? A key to knowledge or a memory? The painting is showing me my death, David. It's not a metaphor for a philosophical journey. It's terrifyingly literal, Emily countered, pulling her arm away, the frustration and fear boiling over. It's a physical key. The shadow is holding it. It's telling me to find it. He nodded, conceding the point. All right, physical key. Think about places you've lived, places you visited often. A childhood hiding spot? An old locker. I've been through every box of my old stuff since this whole nightmare started, Emily said, gesturing vaguely at the scattered remnants of their search. I've found nothing. It's like it doesn't exist. Or it exists somewhere I haven't looked yet. Or, it's not mine. That last thought hung in the air, chilling them both. Not hers. Could the key belong to someone else? Someone connected to the painting or to the artist? What about the artist? David suggested, his eyes lighting up with a new line of inquiry. Elias Thorne. Did he have any known eccentricities? Any specific themes in his other work? Maybe it's a key to his past, and somehow that's intertwined with yours. I looked him up, remember? He was reclusive, not much information out there. And his other works were mostly landscapes, really traditional stuff. Nothing like this. Emily gestured to the painting, a shudder running through her. This is an anomaly, David. It's not like the rest of his portfolio. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unsolved mystery pressing down on them. The apartment, once filled with the mundane sounds of their search, was now eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic tick-tock of Emily's old grandfather clock in the corner, a gift from her actual grandfather. Suddenly, Emily's eyes widened. The grandfather clock. It was old, a genuine antique, passed down through generations. Her grandfather had always been particular about it, insisting it was more than just a timepiece. He'd often tell her stories about it, not just its history but its quirks. He'd mentioned a hidden secret once, a playful wink accompanying the words, which Emily had always dismissed as an old man's fancy. But now, the clock, she breathed, pushing herself up. My grandfather's clock. He always said it had a secret, a hidden compartment. I thought he was just being whimsical. David was on his feet instantly. Where is it? Emily led him to the tall, dark wood clock. Its polished surface gleamed faintly in the dim light, the brass pendulum swinging hypnotically behind the glass. Her grandfather had meticulously maintained it, keeping it wound and chiming perfectly. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, remembering her grandfather's gnarled fingers doing the same. He never showed me where it was, she admitted, her voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. He just said, some things are meant to be found when the time is right, little bird. David carefully examined the clock, running his hands along the ornate carvings, pressing gently on panels, listening for any telltale clicks or shifts. The clock was solid, heavy, and seemingly impenetrable. There has to be a mechanism, David muttered, his focus intense. A latch, a button, a specific sequence. Emily remembered her grandfather's hands, always busy, always tinkering. He had a specific way of winding the clock, a ritual almost. He'd open the small front door, insert the key, turn it, and then before closing it, he would always give a very particular, almost imperceptible, twist to the small brass finial at the top of the door frame. Not the decorative finial on the very top of the clock, but the tiny one that capped the slender column on the right side of the door. She'd watched him do it countless times, never understanding why. Wait, Emily said, her heart pounding. The finial. On the door. My grandfather always twisted it after winding the clock. David paused, looking at the tiny brass cap. He replicated the motion, a gentle turn. Nothing. He tried again, a bit firmer this time. Still nothing. Maybe it's a specific direction? Or timing? He wondered. Emily closed her eyes, trying to conjure the exact memory. The click of the key, the whir of the mechanism, the soft chime. And then her grandfather's hand, a slight counterclockwise twist of the finial, almost as if he were checking its tightness. Counterclockwise, she exclaimed. And it was always after he'd wound it, after the chime settled. David tried it. He twisted the small brass finial counterclockwise. This time there was a soft, almost inaudible click. A tiny narrow panel on the side of the clock, almost invisible against the grain of the wood, sprang open by a fraction of an inch. Emily gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a small velvet-lined shelf, lay a single object. It was a key. Old dark bronze with an intricate head. David carefully reached in and pulled it out. The light caught its surface, revealing the design on its head. It wasn't an M, nor was it two serpents devouring their tails. It was a stylized intertwining of what looked like two ravens' heads, their beaks almost touching, forming a complex, almost symmetrical symbol. It was undeniably the key from the painting, the exact one. A wave of dizzying realization washed over Emily. Her grandfather, a man she had loved and trusted implicitly, had hidden this key. This key which somehow, inexplicably, was also in her death painting. The man who had given her the clock, the man who had loved her, had also, perhaps unknowingly, set her on this path. This is it, David said, his voice hushed, holding the key up. The key from the painting. Emily took it from him, the cold metal heavy in her palm. It felt ancient, imbued with a strange, unsettling energy. It was real, and it was terrifying. The painting wasn't just showing her demise. It was giving her the tool to walk towards it. The invitation wasn't chilling. It was a physical artifact, a tangible piece of her inevitable future. But what did it unlock? And why had her grandfather, of all people, kept it hidden? The question swirled, more ominous than ever. The painting had provided the first clue. Now she held the actual key. The next step, whatever it was, felt like stepping off a cliff. She looked at David, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a strange, desperate compulsion. They had found the key. Now they had to discover what it was for. And the thought, as it settled in her mind, was utterly terrifying. The key felt impossibly heavy in Emily's hand, a cold metallic promise of answers they weren't sure they wanted. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the rush of blood in her ears. The painting, in the periphery of her vision, seemed to hum with a dark, expectant energy. David, seeing the fear etched on her face, reached out and gently took the key from her, his touch a small anchor in the storm of her dread. "We need to figure out what this unlocks," he said, his voice low, a determined edge cutting through the tremor of his own apprehension. He turned back to the stack of journals, his father's meticulous handwriting now seeming less like a comfort and more like a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a deep, dark forest. My father, he must have left a clue. Something about a key, or a hidden compartment. Emily nodded, her throat tight. He was trying to understand it, wasn't he? Not just hide it. He was trying to find a way to stop it. David didn't answer, already flipping through the pages of the journal he'd been studying, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room stretched, thick and oppressive, broken only by the rustle of pages and the distant creaking of the old house settling around them. Emily's gaze kept drifting back to the ominous canvas in the corner, its vibrant colors now seeming almost predatory. She felt a phantom chill, a sense of being observed, judged. The man in the painting, Elias Thorne himself, seemed to watch them with an unnerving intensity, his eyes following their every move. Or was it just her imagination frayed by fear? "Here," David finally breathed, his finger tracing a passage towards the end of the journal. Entry from May 12th, just a few weeks before he died. He writes, "The final safeguard, Thorne's last secret." He believed it held the true mechanism, the very heart of its malevolence. A key not for a door but for a revelation, hidden where the past converges with the present, beneath the gaze of the forgotten. It requires a specific touch, a specific understanding to reveal its truth. It is not about seeing the death, but understanding why it is seen. Emily moved closer, leaning over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the cryptic words. The forgotten? What does that mean? And where the past converges with the present? David shook his head, a muscle twitching in his jaw. My father was always a bit poetic in his notes, especially when he was close to a breakthrough. Beneath the gaze of the forgotten, it sounds like it refers to something old, something overlooked but still present. He looked around the study, his eyes sweeping over the dusty bookshelves, the antique furniture, the other, less significant paintings that adorned the walls. This house is full of forgotten things. What's the most overlooked, yet still present object here? They spent the next hour in a methodical, almost desperate search. They checked behind every portrait, under every rug, inside every drawer that wasn't already locked and accounted for. The key, now resting on David's palm, felt like a compass without a needle, waiting for its true north. Emily's anxiety mounted with every fruitless turn, every empty space. The house, once a comforting relic of David's childhood, now felt like a labyrinth designed to mock them. She imagined Thorn himself, somewhere in the ether, laughing at their futile attempts. "Think about it," Emily said, pacing the worn Persian rug. "Your father found this key, and he wrote about Thorn's last secret, about a final safeguard. He was searching for it too. Where would he have looked? Where would he have expected to find something hidden?" David stopped, his gaze drifting to a large, ornate grandfather clock standing silently in the corner, its pendulum long since stilled. It wasn't particularly remarkable, just an old piece of furniture, a fixture in the room since he was a child. "The forgotten," he murmured, walking towards it. "It's always been there, always ignored. A silent sentinel." He ran his hand over the dark, polished wood, feeling for any seams or irregularities. Emily joined him, her heart thumping. The clock was imposing, easily 7 feet tall, its face a faded testament to bygone hours. David pressed against the side panels, tapped gently on the top. Nothing. Then his fingers brushed against a small, almost imperceptible groove along the base, near where the clock met the wall. It was barely visible, camouflaged by years of dust and the natural grain of the wood. He pressed harder, and with a faint click, a small section of the base slid inwards, revealing a shallow, dark recess. Inside, nestled within a velvet lining, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was no larger than a jewelry box, dark mahogany, with a silver clasp that showed no visible keyhole. "This has to be it," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of dread and exhilaration. David carefully retrieved the box. It felt surprisingly light, yet heavy with unspoken secrets. He examined the silver clasp. There was no keyhole in the traditional sense, but rather a small circular indentation, almost like a perfect mold. He looked at the key in his hand. The head of the key, rather than being a jagged series of teeth, was a perfectly circular, flat disc, etched with a swirling serpentine design. He aligned the key's head with the indentation on the box. It slid in with a soft, precise snick. A faint click echoed in the stillness of the room, and the clasp sprung open. Emily held her breath as David slowly lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of aged, faded silk, was not a single item, but a collection of strange artifacts. There was a small, intricately carved bone figurine, no bigger than his thumb, depicting a twisted, almost skeletal human form. Next to it, a tightly rolled parchment, bound with a thin, dark leather thong. And finally, a small, dried flower, its petals a brittle, dark crimson, pressed flat and delicate. David carefully picked up the parchment first, his fingers brushing against the ancient paper. He unrolled it gently, revealing a series of symbols and a language he didn't recognize, interspersed with what looked like crude anatomical drawings and astrological charts. It was not his father's handwriting. This was older, far older. "What is this?" Emily breathed, peering over his shoulder. "It looks ritualistic." David's eyes scanned the document, his father's journal entry echoing in his mind. Thorn's last secret. He believed it held the true mechanism, the very heart of its malevolence. He saw a familiar name repeated several times in the foreign script, underlined and emphasized, Thorn. And next to it, a symbol that looked eerily similar to the serpentine design on the key. "This isn't about just seeing death," David said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "It's about causing it. This is a blueprint, a spell." Thorn didn't just paint visions of death. He was trying to manifest them. He was trying to harness a power, to control fate itself. As he spoke, a profound chill swept through the room, colder than any draft. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Emily's gaze, drawn by an irresistible force, snapped back to the painting. The colors on the canvas seemed to deepen, to pulse with an inner light. The man's eyes, Thorn's eyes, were no longer merely watching. They were burning, alive with a malevolent triumph. And then, slowly, sickeningly, the corners of his painted lips began to curl upwards, into a slow, terrifying smile. A smile of pure, unadulterated evil directed right at them. Emily gasped, stumbling back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The bone figurine in the box vibrated faintly, a low hum resonating through the wood. And as she watched in frozen horror, the scene in the painting began to shift. The vibrant, colorful landscape behind Thorn began to ripple, like water disturbed. The sky darkened, churning with ominous clouds, and a single jagged bolt of lightning tore across the canvas, illuminating a new horrifying detail. In the background, barely visible before, a figure began to coalesce. A figure falling. A woman, her hair streaming behind her, arms flailing, plummeting towards a jagged, rocky coastline. It was her. It was Emily. And the cliff she was falling from was the exact same cliff she had seen in her own vision, the one she'd almost driven off of just moments ago. The painting wasn't just showing their deaths anymore. It was creating them. And Thorn, with his chilling, triumphant smile, was the conductor of their demise. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the terrifying truth that had just slammed into her. The almost crash, the chillingly accurate vision. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a prelude. Thorn wasn't just an eccentric collector. He was a manipulator, a puppeteer pulling the strings of destiny, using that cursed canvas as his stage. Her blood ran cold, not just from fear, but from a profound sense of betrayal. He had invited them ostensibly to help, but in reality to orchestrate their ends. She found herself back in the gallery, the sterile white walls now seeming to close in, the air suddenly thick with a suffocating dread. Thorn stood before the central painting, his back to her, his silhouette framed by the spectral glow that emanated from the canvas. He turned slowly, that same unnerving smile still fixed upon his lips, his eyes, dark and fathomless, locking onto hers. There was no longer any pretense of academic curiosity or shared fascination, only a chilling predatory glee. "Astute Emily," he purred, his voice a low silken whisper that scraped against her nerves. "You're quicker than I anticipated. Most simply succumb to the inevitable, believing it fate. But you see the hand behind the curtain." Her breath hitched. You're doing this. You're making it happen." The words were barely a whisper, a desperate plea for him to deny it, even as she knew he wouldn't. Thorn chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Making it happen? No, my dear. The painting shows what will happen. I merely facilitate the process, a gentle nudge, if you will, a push towards the predetermined outcome, ensuring the vision is fulfilled with exquisite precision." He gestured vaguely towards the canvas. "Think of it as a divine blueprint. I simply ensure the construction crew follows the plans." "But David, Michael," Emily's voice cracked. "What have you done to them?" A fresh wave of panic surged through her. If Thorn was orchestrating their deaths, what about her friends? Thorn's smile widened, revealing a flash of perfectly white teeth. David, bless his analytical mind, was so consumed by the pattern, the mathematical possibilities. He was so close to understanding the true nature of the canvas, but alas, his curiosity proved fatal. Tragedy, really? Such a brilliant mind, undone by a simple misstep. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. As for Michael, he was a simpler soul, more attuned to the visceral. His end was less complicated, quicker. Emily felt a scream building in her throat, but it died there, choked by terror. "You murdered them." "Murder?" Thorn feigned offense, pressing a hand to his chest. "Such a crude word. I merely ensured the visions manifested. The painting, Emily, is an oracle. It shows the death, not a death. There is only one path. I simply clear the obstacles and ensure the path is taken." He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with an almost feverish intensity. "For centuries, this painting has been a curio, a macabre parlor trick. But Emily, I unlocked its true potential. I learned to read its language, to interpret its subtle cues, and most importantly, to influence the conditions that bring its prophecies to fruition." He stopped directly in front of her, his gaze intense. "You see, the painting doesn't just show a future. It shows the future. a singular, unavoidable destiny. But the path to that destiny can be circuitous, full of near misses and lucky breaks. My genius lies in eliminating those lucky breaks, in streamlining the journey to the inevitable. Emily stumbled backward, her hand instinctively reaching for something, anything, to defend herself. There was nothing, just the cold, hard reality of Thorne's malevolence. Why? Why are you doing this? Thorne laughed again, a sound devoid of warmth. Why? Because it's beautiful, Emily. The elegance of it. To hold the threads of fate in your hands, to witness the perfection of a destiny fulfilled, to be the architect of the unavoidable. It's the ultimate power, the ultimate art. His eyes drifted back to the ominous canvas. And besides, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the painting demands it. Demands what? Emily dared to ask, her voice shaking. Completion, Thorne replied simply. It feeds on the fulfillment of its visions. Each death it foretells, each life it consumes strengthens it, makes it more. He spread his hands, a theatrical gesture. I am merely its devoted curator, ensuring its nourishment, and in return it grants me understanding, a glimpse behind the veil. Emily's mind raced, desperately trying to find a loophole, a weakness in his terrifying logic. So you saw your own death, then? Is that how you discovered this? Thorne's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Ah, clever query. But some secrets, Emily, are best kept. Suffice it to say, my path is different. My understanding is deeper. I am not a subject of the painting, but its partner. He paused, then his smile returned, colder and sharper than before. And now, Emily, it's time for your final act. Her eyes darted to the painting. She knew what he wanted. He wanted her to look at it again, to see the vision of her death, and then he would ensure it came to pass. The image of the car plummeting, the flashing lights, the twisted metal, it was burned into her memory. But she had survived that. She had almost survived. Could she fight it again? No, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I won't look. You can't make me. Thorne tilted his head, a patronizing look on his face. Oh, but I don't need to make you look, my dear. The vision is already imprinted. You've seen it. You've felt its icy breath. All that remains is the execution, and I assure you it will be swift and precisely as depicted. He began to circle her slowly, his footsteps soft on the polished concrete floor. Unless, of course, you'd like to see a different one? Perhaps a more intimate portrayal? We have options. The implication was clear. If she didn't cooperate, he would force her to look at a new vision, undoubtedly a more horrifying, inescapable one. He was playing with her, reveling in her fear. What do you want from me? She demanded, spinning to keep him in her sight. Simply your cooperation in fulfilling your destiny, Thorne said, stopping directly behind her. His voice was now right next to her ear, sending shivers down her spine. A final perfect tableau. The painting demands it, and I am merely its humble servant. She whirled around, pushing him away instinctively, but he barely budged. He was stronger than he looked, or perhaps her terror had sapped her own strength. Her eyes frantically searched the gallery, looking for an exit, a weapon, anything. The heavy oak doors were too far, and she knew he'd be on her before she reached them. The room felt like a cage, the painting at its center, a predatory eye watching her every move. You can't get away, Emily, Thorne murmured as if reading her thoughts. Every escape route, every desperate gamble, every hidden path, it's all accounted for. The vision you saw, the one you almost avoided, was merely the first draft. I have since refined it, perfected it. Your destiny is sealed, my dear. It is merely a matter of time and method. He reached out, his hand moving with surprising speed, and seized her wrist. His grip was like iron. Come, he commanded, his voice losing its silken quality, replaced by a hard, unyielding edge. Let us observe the final strokes of your masterpiece. He began to pull her towards the painting, towards the glowing, swirling colors that now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Emily struggled, twisting and wrenching her arm, but he held fast. Her feet scraped against the floor as he dragged her closer and closer to the canvas. She could feel the heat radiating from it, a sickly warmth that promised nothing but oblivion. Her mind screamed, refusing to accept this fate. There had to be a way. There had to be a way to break free from this predetermined nightmare. The painting, Thorne had said, fed on the fulfillment of its visions. What if a vision wasn't fulfilled? What if someone defied it? As she was pulled inexorably closer, her eyes locked onto the swirling patterns of the canvas. She didn't want to see her death again, but she couldn't tear her gaze away. The colors seemed to merge, to shift, to coalesce into something new, something terrifyingly familiar yet subtly altered. It wasn't the car crash this time. It was something else. A new vision. A new inescapable trap. Thorne had indeed refined it. He had created a new final prophecy. And as her eyes focused, the image solidified, showing her not an external accident, but a more insidious internal demise, a slow, suffocating end within the very confines of the gallery itself. Her heart leaped into her throat. This wasn't the roadside. This was here. This was now. Thorne hadn't just predicted her death. He had brought it into the room with them. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. A suffocating pressure began to bear down on her chest, mimicking the vision, making it hard to breathe. Thorne watched her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated triumph, as he released her wrist, confident that she was now fully immersed, fully trapped, in the painting's final fatal vision. He had orchestrated every detail, every emotion, every breath. He was the conductor, and she, Emily, was merely the instrument, playing out the final chilling notes of a symphony of death. But as the darkness began to press in, a tiny defiant spark ignited within her. Thorne had said the painting fed on fulfillment. What if, just what if, she could starve it? What if the true power lay not in the vision itself, but in the belief in its inevitability? What if the only way to beat the painting, to beat Thorne, was to refuse to play her part? To refuse to die? Emily's breath hitched, a gasp that was less fear and more a sudden electrifying clarity. The cold dread that had settled in her bones for weeks began to recede, replaced by a fierce, almost desperate surge of defiance. Refuse to die. The words echoed in her mind, not as a denial of mortality, but as a rejection of the script the painting had laid out for her. She wouldn't be a puppet. She wouldn't be a victim. Her vision, a jumble of shattered glass, a blinding flash, and the sickening lurch of impact, had haunted her every waking moment. It was a car crash, she was certain, a violent collision on a rain-slicked road, her car a mangled wreck, her life extinguished in an instant. The painting had shown her the exact make and model of the other vehicle, a dark sedan, and the distinctive curve of the highway near the old industrial park. For days she'd been paralyzed, avoiding driving, flinching at every car horn, every siren. But now a new path opened. She started small. Her first act of rebellion was to sell her car. It was a rash decision, fueled by adrenaline, but it felt like severing a tether. If she didn't drive, she couldn't die in a car crash. Simple, brutal logic. The buyer, a young man named Michael, seemed perplexed by her urgency, but the cash in her hand felt like a small victory, a down payment on her freedom. Next, she changed her commute. Instead of the bus route that took her anywhere near the industrial park, she took a longer, more circuitous train journey. It added an hour to her day, but the steel tracks, the rhythmic clatter, felt safer, more predictable than the open road. She avoided crowds, took different routes home each night, even changed her grocery store. She became a ghost in her own life, a shadow constantly shifting, trying to outmaneuver a fate she'd only glimpsed. The apartment, where the painting still hung, became a battleground of wills. She couldn't bring herself to destroy it, not yet. There was a morbid fascination, a perverse need to keep her enemy close. But she turned it to face the wall, covered it with a thick canvas sheet, and then, as a final act of defiance, she stacked a tower of books in front of it, blocking its view, blocking its power. It was symbolic, she knew, but symbolism felt potent now. Days bled into a week, then two. Emily felt exhausted but alive. The constant vigilance was draining, turning her once vibrant world into a landscape of potential traps. Every unexpected sound, every sudden movement, sent a jolt of fear through her. But the crash hadn't happened. The dark sedan hadn't materialized. A fragile hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of her dread. Maybe it was working. Maybe she was starving the painting. Then the whispers started. Not actual voices, not at first. More like echoes in the periphery of her hearing. A faint scrape when she was alone in her apartment. The distinct sound of keys jingling outside her door when no one was there. A feeling of being watched. a persistent prickle on the back of her neck that made her spin around, heart pounding, to find only empty air. One evening, she returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Her heart leaped into her throat. She'd been so careful, always double-checking the lock. She pushed it open slowly, ready to scream, ready to fight. The apartment was undisturbed. Nothing stolen, nothing out of place. Except the stack of books in front of the covered painting had toppled. They lay scattered on the floor, the heavy canvas sheet slightly askew, revealing a sliver of the dark, unyielding frame beneath. A chill seeped into her bones, colder than any draft. She hadn't touched the books. No one else had been in her apartment. She slowly, deliberately restacked them, her hands trembling. The painting was aware. It was fighting back. Her resolve, however, only hardened. This wasn't just a vision, it was an active force. Thorn had said it fed on fear. Well, she wouldn't feed it. She went to the library, immersing herself in obscure texts on curses, art history, and the psychology of belief. She searched for anything that could explain what she was facing. The internet was a rabbit hole of urban legends and conspiracy theories, but she found a few tantalizing threads about artists who imbued their work with powerful, sometimes sinister, intentions. One evening, while researching a particular school of occult art from the 19th century, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the answer button. Her paranoia screamed at her not to pick up, but a morbid curiosity, a desperate need for answers, won out. "Hello," she said, her voice tight. A low, familiar chuckle filled her ear. "Emily, I knew you'd pick up eventually." Thorn. Her blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" she demanded, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Emily, you underestimate me." His voice was smooth, almost purring. "You've been very busy, haven't you? Selling your car, changing your routine. Such a spirited little mouse, trying to escape the trap." A wave of nausea washed over her. He knew everything. "What do you want?" "Oh, I want nothing. The painting, however, is a different matter. It's displeased. You're disrupting its natural order." "Its natural order is to kill people," she spat, her anger momentarily overriding her fear. "It shows them what is," Thorn corrected, his voice losing some of its pleasantry. "It merely reflects the truth. And you, Emily, you are trying to deny the truth. A dangerous game." "I refuse to believe it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I refuse to be a part of it." "Belief," Thorn mused. "An interesting concept. Do you truly believe you can outrun destiny? Do you think the universe will simply bend to your will because you've decided to take a different bus route?" His laugh was chilling. "The tapestry of fate is vast, Emily. There are always other threads, other patterns." "What are you talking about? You had a vision of a car crash, didn't you? A violent end on a rain-slicked road. You've avoided that. Commendable. But do you truly think that's the only way the painting can claim you? The painting doesn't care how you die, Emily. Only that you die." His words struck her like a physical blow. The specific details of her vision, the dark sedan, the industrial park, she'd focused so intently on avoiding them. But what if Thorn was right? What if those were just the details of one potential future, and her defiance simply opened the door to another? "You're trying to scare me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm trying to enlighten you," Thorn countered, his voice suddenly sharp. "The painting will have its due. You think you can starve it? It feeds on inevitability, Emily, on the certainty of what is to come. And the more you fight it, the more tangled the threads become, the more creative the outcomes." He hung up. Emily stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, the dial tone a buzzing drone against her skull. Creative outcomes. The phrase burrowed into her mind, sowing a new, more insidious seed of dread. Her initial clarity, her defiant hope, began to curdle. Was she truly outsmarting it, or was she merely pushing it to find a more elaborate, perhaps more horrifying path to her demise? The next day, the subtle shifts escalated. She was walking to the train station, her usual circuitous route, when a sudden violent gust of wind ripped her umbrella from her hand, sending it cartwheeling into the street. She instinctively darted after it, right into the path of an oncoming delivery truck. The driver slammed on his brakes, the screech of tires a deafening shriek, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. She froze inches from the grill, her heart hammering against her ribs. The truck driver yelled, his face a mask of fury and fear. She stumbled back onto the sidewalk, trembling, her umbrella forgotten. It wasn't a car crash. It wasn't the dark sedan. But it was an accident. And it was terrifyingly close. Too close. Later that afternoon at work, she reached for a file on a high shelf. The old metal ladder, usually sturdy, wobbled violently. She gripped the shelf, her knuckles white, as the ladder bucked beneath her. She imagined herself falling, striking her head on a desk, a sudden fatal impact. She managed to steady herself, slowly descending, her legs like jelly. Another near miss. Another deviation from her original vision, yet still an echo of a violent accidental death. The painting wasn't just showing her death anymore. It was orchestrating it. Or rather, it was manipulating circumstances, pushing her into situations that aligned with the spirit of her vision, if not the exact letter. Thorne's words echoed. The painting doesn't care how you die, Emily. Only that you die. The defiance that had fueled her began to crack, replaced by a suffocating sense of paranoia. Every shadow held a threat, every mundane object a potential weapon. The world around her, once familiar, transformed into a labyrinth of hidden dangers. She was no longer just avoiding her vision. She was fighting an invisible, omnipresent enemy that twisted reality itself. That night she couldn't sleep. The apartment felt colder, heavier. She kept hearing the faint scraping sound again, emanating from behind the stack of books. A low rhythmic thump, thump thump. It wasn't a sound she recognized, but it was undeniably there, subtle yet insistent. Felt like a pulse. The pulse of the painting. The pulse of her impending doom. She sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide, staring at the wall where the painting lay hidden. It wasn't just aware. It was alive. And it was demanding its due. The realization was bone-chilling. She hadn't starved it. She had merely angered it. And now it was coming for her. A guttural, unseen groan seemed to ripple through the very foundation of the old house. It wasn't a sound from the pipes or the wind. It was deeper, resonant, like the earth itself sighing in malevolent satisfaction. Sarah stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear from her throat. The air in the room, already heavy with dust and dread, grew impossibly cold, prickling her skin with 1,000 tiny needles of ice. Shadows, which had been merely passive absences of light, now seemed to writhe and stretch, elongating into menacing forms that danced at the periphery of her vision. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of her and Michael laughing on a sun-drenched beach, suddenly crashed to the floor, the glass shattering with a sharp, violent crack that echoed in the sudden, profound silence. Sarah flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the broken shards, then back at the wall, a terrifying certainty solidifying in her mind. It wasn't coming for her in a physical sense, not yet. It was coming through the house, through the very fabric of her reality. It was asserting its dominance, making its displeasure known. Panic, raw and visceral, seized her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this cursed place, but where would she go? The painting had shown her death, a chilling premonition that now felt like a promise. Running wouldn't save her. It would only delay the inevitable. She had to fight, or at least understand. Her mind raced, frantically sifting through every piece of research, every cryptic note, every whispered legend she'd uncovered about the painting, demanding its due. What did that mean? What did a painting, an entity of paint and canvas, demand? Power? Blood? Completion? A memory sharp and unwelcome flashed into her mind. An obscure, half-forgotten passage from an old, brittle journal she'd found in the archives, written by a 19th-century art collector named Elias Thorne. He'd owned a similar painting, though not this one, a piece he described as a mirror of fate, reflecting not what is but what will be. He'd written of its insatiable hunger, how it drank the life it foretold, and how to deny it its sustenance was to invite its wrath, for a prophecy unfulfilled is an agony to its very soul. A prophecy unfulfilled is an agony to its very soul. The words resonated with a sickening clarity. Michael. The painting had shown Michael's death, a gruesome, violent end, but Michael was still alive. He was a gaping, unresolved plot hole in the painting's narrative, an unfulfilled prophecy, and Sarah, by hiding the painting, by trying to starve it of its morbid feast, had not only angered it, she had inadvertently prevented it from closing the loop on Michael's fate. The painting wasn't just showing death. It was orchestrating it, or perhaps consuming it. It was a parasitic entity, feeding on the life force released at the moment of the death it depicted. And Michael, still breathing, still existing, was like a meal left unfinished on a table, slowly spoiling, infuriating the hungry beast that had prepared it. A new terrifying understanding dawned on her. The painting wasn't just angry at her. It was furious at Michael's continued existence. It wanted to complete its work. It wanted its due, and Michael was the payment. The house groaned again, louder this time. A sound like tortured wood and strained metal. A floorboard upstairs creaked. Then another, as if an immense, invisible weight was moving through the empty rooms above. Sarah felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The painting wasn't just a threat to her. It was a threat to Michael. A much more immediate and terrible one than she had ever imagined. She hadn't just put her own life in danger by acquiring it. She had unwittingly condemned Michael, making him the target of an ancient, starving entity. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. What could she do? She couldn't just let the painting come for him. He was innocent, oblivious. He was just a curious friend, caught in the terrifying vortex of her obsession. She had to warn him. She had to protect him. More than that, she had to somehow understand how to appease this thing, how to satisfy its hunger without sacrificing Michael. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any object, any clue. Her gaze landed on her laptop, still open on the coffee table, displaying the last page of her research. Elias Thorne's journal. She snatched it up, her fingers flying across the keyboard, searching for more about the insatiable hunger and prophecies unfulfilled. She found another entry, scrawled in a frantic hand. The painting feeds on the energy of the moment of transition. It thrives on the culmination of fate. To deny it is to invite a storm, for the canvas will tear at the fabric of reality until its vision is manifest. Or, until it finds a substitute. A substitute. The word hung in the air. A chilling possibility. Could it take someone else? Could she offer herself instead? The thought was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was a thought nonetheless. If it meant saving Michael, would she? No. That was a fool's errand. It had shown her death too. It wanted both. Or perhaps it wanted Michael first, to complete its current prophecy, and then it would come for her, as it always intended. The house seemed to hold its breath. The creaking stopped. The oppressive cold remained, but the active malevolence seemed to pause, as if the entity behind the wall was waiting, listening to her thoughts, savoring her fear. Sarah knew she couldn't stay here. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage, slowly constricting around her. She needed to get out, to find Michael, to warn him, and together perhaps they could figure out a way out of this nightmare. But how? How did you fight a painting that could bend reality? How did you outrun a prophecy? She remembered Michael's fascination, his insistence that they study the painting together, his genuine interest. He was smart, analytical. Maybe, just maybe, his scientific mind could find a loophole where her artistic, superstitious one only saw doom. Her hands moved on their own, grabbing her car keys from the hook by the door. She didn't bother with a coat, despite the pervasive chill. Her phone was in her pocket. She had to call him, but first, she needed to be out of this house, away from the suffocating presence behind the wall. As she reached the front door, her hand on the cold brass knob, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to drift from the wall where the painting lay hidden. It wasn't words, not really, but a sensation, a chilling suggestion that slithered into her mind. Asterisk, you can't outrun fate. You can only delay it. And the longer you delay, the hungrier I become. Asterisk. A fresh wave of terror washed over her, but beneath it, a desperate resolve began to harden. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for Michael's. And if the painting wanted its due, she would make sure it earned every terrifying inch of it. She yanked the door open and burst out into the night, the cold air a shock to her lungs, but a welcome escape from the suffocating grip of the house. She had to find Michael. Now, before the painting found him first. She yanked the door open and burst out into the night, the cold air a shock to her lungs, but a welcome escape from the suffocating grip of the house. She had to find Michael. Now, before the painting found him first. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the car keys, the metallic jingle sounding impossibly loud in the dead silence of the street. The engine roared to life, a comforting rumble that did little to soothe the frantic pounding in her chest. She pulled away from the curb, tires squealing, not bothering to look back at the dark silhouette of the house that now felt like a living, breathing predator. Her phone was clutched in her hand, speed dialing Michael's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Again and again. Where could he be? He'd mentioned the local historical society, a place with obscure archives that might hold clues about Elias Thorne. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. As she sped through the deserted streets, her mind raced, replaying every horrifying detail. The shifting colors, the deepening shadows, the undeniable, terrifying clarity of the death it had shown her. It wasn't just a vision, it was a promise. And it felt like it was already reaching for her, a cold tendril of dread wrapping around her heart. Meanwhile, Michael was oblivious to the immediate danger, utterly consumed by his research. He sat hunched over a dusty wooden table in a back room of the town's historical society, surrounded by stacks of brittle, yellowed documents. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. He'd finally found it. A series of personal journals, bound in faded leather, tucked away in a box labeled simply Thorne Estate Miscellaneous. These weren't the official records, but something far more intimate, far more chilling. Elias Thorne's handwriting, initially neat and precise, grew increasingly erratic with each passing entry. Michael skimmed through the early pages, noting Thorne's initial fascination with his new acquisition, the painting. Thorne, like Michael, had been an art enthusiast, drawn to the canvas's unique, almost hypnotic quality. He wrote of its strange ability to reflect the viewer's innermost anxieties, a psychological curiosity. But then the tone shifted. October 14, 1908, Michael read aloud, his voice a low murmur in the silent room. The visions, they are no longer mere reflections. They are specific, unsettlingly so. My gardener, old Mr. Henderson, looked upon it only yesterday. Today he was found in the well. A tragic accident, they say, but I saw it. The painting showed it. A rope fraying, a struggle, a fall. Michael's eyes widened. This wasn't just about a painting showing a premonition. Thorne believed it was showing the cause of death, not just the outcome. He continued to read, the entries becoming more frantic, more desperate. Thorne started to theorize. The painting wasn't a passive oracle. It was something else entirely. November 2nd, 1908. It demands. Feel it. A coldness emanating from the canvas, a hunger. It is not merely a depiction. It is a lure. Each death, each vision fulfilled, seems to invigorate it. The colors deepen, the shadows within the frame writhe. I believe it feeds. It feeds on the fear, on the despair, on the very act of witnessing one's own demise. Thorne then detailed his desperate attempts to understand and, more importantly, to contain the entity he believed resided within the painting. He wrote of consulting ancient texts, of obscure rituals, of a desperate search for materials that could bind and seal whatever malevolent force had taken root in the canvas. He described a specific blend of rare earth pigments, meticulously applied to the back of the canvas, almost like a protective ward. He spoke of a unique varnish, infused with specific resins, intended to create an impermeable barrier. And most chillingly, he mentioned a sigil painstakingly carved into the inner side of the painting's frame, meant to act as a lock, a final desperate attempt to imprison the entity. December 19, 1908. The seal is complete. For now, it is dormant, but it watches. I can feel its patience. It is not truly asleep, merely biding its time. The deaths were not premonitions, but offerings. By truly seeing one's death in its depths, the viewer becomes entwined, a contract signed in terror. The entity draws strength from this connection, slowly manifesting, slowly escaping its prison. My work is not to destroy it, for it cannot be destroyed. My work is to ensure it remains a prisoner. My work is to prevent it from ever again demanding life. Michael's blood ran cold. He remembered the new frame he'd put on the painting, a beautiful ornate design that had replaced the old simple one. He remembered cleaning the back of the canvas, wiping away years of dust. He hadn't noticed any sigil, any strange pigments. He had, with his own hands, unknowingly dismantled Elias Thorne's intricate, desperate containment system. He had set it free. He snatched up his phone, his missed calls from Jessica flashing on the screen like an urgent warning. He called her back, his fingers fumbling. No answer. His stomach dropped. Jessica had viewed the painting. She had seen her death. And he had too. They had both activated it. They had both signed the contract. Just then, the heavy oak doors of the Historical Society's archive room burst open. Jessica stood there, breathless, her hair disheveled, eyes wide with a terror Michael recognized instantly. "Michael!" she gasped, her voice hoarse. "The painting, it changed. It showed me my death. It's real, Michael, it's coming for us." Michael shot up from his chair, scattering papers across the floor. "Jessica, listen to me," he said, his voice urgent, strained. "It's worse than you think. Much worse. I found Thorne's journals. The painting isn't just showing deaths, Jessica. It's causing them. It's a prison, a lure. Thorne built a containment system, a series of seals to keep something, an entity trapped inside. And I accidentally broke them." Jessica stumbled forward, her face pale. "Broken? What do you mean broken?" "I saw it, Michael. A frozen lake, a crack? I was drowning, utterly alone. And I saw mine too, Jessica," Michael confessed, his own mind reeling from the memory. "A fall from a great height, a flash of something sharp below. We both looked upon it, we both saw. We activated it. It's awake now. Thorne called it hungry." As the last word left Michael's lips, the fluorescent lights above them flickered erratically, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch across the walls. A profound, unnatural chill permeated the room, seeping into their bones despite the late summer night. From the very corners of the room, from the stacks of forgotten history, they heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor, or the rustle of ancient, brittle pages turning themselves. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that bypassed their ears and went straight to the primal fear center of their brains. Then Michael's phone, which he'd assumed was dead from his earlier attempts to call Jessica, suddenly vibrated violently in his hand. The screen glowed with an unknown number. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs, a cold dread washing over him. Jessica gripped his arm, her nails digging into his skin. He instinctively answered, bringing the phone slowly to his ear. A voice, barely a whisper, distorted and ancient, crackled through the speaker, seemingly pulled from the very depths of the earth. Said only one word: "Hungry." And then the line went dead. Michael and Jessica stared at each other, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them with the force of a tidal wave. The painting wasn't just in the house. Its influence, the entity itself, was reaching out. It knew where they were. It was coming. The silence in the hotel room thickened, no longer a comfort but a suffocating blanket. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to writhe with unseen intent. Michael's hand instinctively found Jessica's, their fingers intertwining in a desperate grip. The fear wasn't just a cold knot in his stomach. It was a living thing crawling under his skin, whispering doubts into his ear, chilling him to his very core. "It knows," Jessica breathed, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. "How can it know where we are? We're hundreds of miles away." Michael shook his head, a futile gesture against the crushing weight of the unknown. David said, "It's not just a painting. It's an anchor, a gateway." He believed it was connected to something far older, far deeper than just the canvas. He remembered David's frantic scribblings, the diagrams of symbols and energy currents, dismissed as madness then, but terrifyingly prescient now. Maybe it's not physical tracking. Maybe it's psychic, a connection forged by viewing it, by knowing its secret. A sudden sharp chill permeated the room, raising goosebumps on their arms. It wasn't the air conditioning. The thermostat read a comfortable 72 degrees. Yet the air felt like a freezer had been opened right beside them, an unnatural cold that seemed to suck the warmth from their very souls. The faint scent of old oil paint, a smell they had come to dread, now wafted subtly through the sterile hotel air, an intrusive, haunting perfume. They scanned the room, searching for a source, a tangible sign. The curtains remained drawn, the television off, the lamp casting a warm, deceptive glow. But the warmth felt artificial, a fragile barrier against the encroaching cold. Michael's gaze snagged on the polished surface of the bedside table, reflecting a distorted sliver of the room. For a split second, he saw not his own reflection, but a blurred skeletal hand reaching out from the darkness, its fingers tipped with jagged claws, just like the image he'd seen in the painting. He blinked and it was gone, replaced by the mundane reflection of the lamp. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, his breath catching in his throat. Jessica was already shaking her head, her eyes fixed on the window. The glass, it's fogging up. From the inside. And it's not cold enough for that. Indeed, a thin mist was forming on the inner pane of the window, obscuring the distant city lights. And as they watched, a grotesque, swirling pattern began to emerge in the condensation, coalescing into what looked horrifyingly like the distorted face from the painting, its eyes staring out, devoid of pupils, filled with an ancient, predatory malevolence. It was a silent, chilling message. "I see you." A low, guttural growl seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a sound that vibrated deep in their bones, not quite audible but felt. It was a sound of immense power, of predatory hunger. The lamp flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters, then steadied, but the message was clear. They weren't safe. Nowhere was safe. The sanctuary they had desperately sought was now just another cage. "We can't stay here," Jessica said, her voice laced with desperation, cracking with raw fear. "But where do we go?" "Followed us across states, Michael. Across the country." "It's not following us," Michael corrected, a terrible realization slowly dawning on him, chilling him more than the unnatural cold. "It's following the connection. The knowledge. We know about it. We've seen it. We're marked. It's inside us somehow, the seed of its prophecy." He thought back to David's final terrified words, his obsession with breaking the cycle, undoing the threads. David hadn't been merely trying to escape the painting. He'd been trying to fight it, to sever its hold. But how do you fight something that merely shows you your inescapable end? How do you defy a fate already painted? The air grew heavier, pressing down on them, stifling their breathing. Jessica clutched her head, wincing, her face contorted in pain. "My head. It's like 1,000 needles pricking my brain. And these whispers. Can you hear them?" Michael strained his ears. At first, nothing but the frantic thumping of his own heart. Then faint, almost imperceptible, a cacophony of hushed voices, like a distant spectral crowd murmuring just beyond the threshold of hearing. He couldn't make out words, but the feeling of them was horrifying. A chorus of condemnation, of eternal sorrow, of a hunger that had no end. "It's trying to break us," Michael said, his jaw clenched, his voice tight with effort. "To instill fear. Feeds on it. It wants us to believe our deaths are inevitable. Then we can't give it what it wants," Jessica retorted, her eyes burning with a sudden, fierce resolve, despite the tremor in her hands. She was terrified, but she was not broken. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to manifest our deaths." David said there was a way. He wouldn't have been so obsessed otherwise, so convinced there was an answer. A faint memory stirred in Michael's mind. David, late at night, hunched over his research, muttering about the true anchor, the first stroke, the crucible of its power. He dismissed it as David's typical rambling, the desperate theories of a man losing his mind, but now it felt crucial, a forgotten key. What if the painting wasn't the origin, but merely a powerful conduit? What if something else in the house, something older, more fundamental, was the real source of its power? The painting, David had once theorized, was merely the mirror, reflecting a deeper, darker truth. "The house," Michael said, the word a bitter taste in his mouth, a chilling realization. "It's not just where the painting is. It's where it belongs, where it draws its power, where it was born." Jessica looked at him, her expression a mix of terror and understanding, her mind racing to catch up. "You think we have to go back? To that house?" The idea was abhorrent. To return to the place of their nightmares, to the very source of the malevolence that now hunted them across the country. It felt like walking willingly into their own graves, a suicidal pact with destiny. But the alternative, waiting in a hotel room while an unseen entity slowly drove them mad and orchestrated their demise, felt even worse, a slow, agonizing surrender. David never destroyed the painting, Michael mused aloud, pacing the small space, his thoughts racing, trying to piece together the fragments of David's obsession. He studied it. He tried to understand it. Why, if it was pure evil, wouldn't he have tried to burn it, bury it, something to get rid of it? Maybe he couldn't, Jessica suggested, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual strength, though still laced with fear. Maybe it's indestructible, or its power would simply transfer to something else, or its influence would simply spread. Or maybe he realized destroying it would be the worst thing he could do, untethering it completely. That thought sent a fresh wave of dread through Michael. What if destroying the painting released the entity completely, untethered from its canvas, a formless, omnipresent horror? That would be an apocalypse. The true anchor, Michael repeated, recalling David's whispered words from one of his more lucid moments. He wasn't talking about the painting itself. He was talking about something within the house that gave the painting its power. He mentioned a specific room, a hidden compartment, something about the original owner, Elias Thorne, the artist. He remembered David's ramblings about Elias Thorne, the reclusive, eccentric artist who had painted the gaze of the oracle. David had been convinced Thorne hadn't just painted the future. He'd engineered it, or tapped into something ancient and dark to imbue the canvas with its power. And that source, David believed, was still present in the house, a dark heart beating beneath the floorboards. A specific room? Jessica asked, her brows furrowing in thought. The studio? The library? We didn't find anything overtly supernatural beyond the painting itself, just dusty old rooms. David was always in the library, Michael said, a spark of insight igniting in his mind, connecting the dots of David's madness to a terrifying truth. He spent hours there poring over old texts, maps, blueprints of the house. He said the house itself was a tapestry of dark design, that every stone held a memory. He kept mentioning the heart of the labyrinth, and the bloodline's secret. Jessica gasped, her eyes widening. The Thorne family. David mentioned them too. He said they were obsessed with the occult, with prophecies and dark rituals. What if the painting is just one piece of a much larger, darker puzzle? What if the house itself is the true monster, and the painting just its voice? The pieces were starting to fit, horrifyingly. The house wasn't just a container for the painting. It was an active participant, a vessel for the entity's power. The painting was merely the display, the projection of a curse rooted deep within the very foundations of the Thorne estate, an evil that had festered for centuries. "We have to go back," Michael stated, the words firm, resolute, despite the cold sweat beading on his forehead, the knot of fear in his stomach solidifying into grim determination. If there's a true anchor, something that empowers the painting, something David was trying to find, it has to be in that house. And if we can find it, maybe we can sever the connection. Maybe we can break the curse, not just for us, but for anyone else who might stumble upon it. But what if it's a trap? Jessica countered, her voice trembling, her gaze unwavering. What if it's waiting for us? Our deaths, they're still out there, Michael. Waiting. It's showing us that it's getting closer. As if on cue, the temperature in the room plummeted again, sending shivers racking through their bodies, their breath misting in the air. The air grew thick, heavy like breathing underwater. And then a sensation Michael would never forget. A cold, spectral touch on his neck, like icy fingers brushing his skin, a breath of frigid air against his ear whispering his name. He recoiled, spinning around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty air, heavy with unseen presence. A faint, distorted image flickered in his peripheral vision. The broken glass, the rushing water, the suffocating darkness from his own predicted death. It was clearer this time, more visceral, more real, as if the entity was projecting it directly into his mind, reminding him of what awaited, a cruel preview. Jessica cried out, clutching her arm, her eyes wide with shock and pain. "My arm! It's burning!" She pulled up her sleeve. On her skin, faint red lines were appearing, crisscrossing patterns, like a spiderweb of tiny, inflamed scratches, tracing delicate, painful patterns. It was a terrifying echo of the thorny vines that had entangled her in her painting, slowly, painfully manifesting on her flesh. The entity wasn't just showing them their deaths. It was beginning to enact them, subtly, incrementally, bringing the prophecy to life. This was no longer a theoretical threat. It was active, immediate, and terrifyingly real. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't hide from it. Their only chance, their only desperate hope, was to confront it. "This is it, Jess," Michael said, his voice grim, determined, stripped bare of all but resolve. "We go back. We find whatever David was looking for, whatever gave that painting its cursed power, and we stop it, or we die trying on our own terms." Jessica met his gaze, her eyes still wide with fear, but now also filled with a desperate, unyielding courage. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a tear of terror and fierce resolve. "Okay, let's go. Together." They gathered their meager belongings, the act feeling absurdly normal in the face of their impending supernatural confrontation. The dread was a palpable weight in the room, pressing down on them, as if the entity itself was watching, waiting for their decision, savoring their fear. Stepping out of the hotel room felt like stepping into an abyss. The sterile hallway, the silent elevator ride down, the bustling lobby. It all felt like a dream, a flimsy veneer over the raw horror that now consumed their lives. Each step towards the rental car was a step closer to the heart of the darkness they were willingly re-entering. The night air was crisp, but they felt no relief from its coolness. The city lights seemed distant, unreal, as if the entire world had faded into a backdrop for their nightmare. As Michael started the car, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a fleeting moment, instead of the empty back seat, he saw a shadowy figure, tall and gaunt, with an impossibly long brush in its hand, its face obscured by the deepest black, its head tilted in silent judgment. He slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping into his throat, but when he looked again, it was gone. Just the empty back seat. Jessica gripped his arm, her knuckles white, her breath hitched. What was that? He shook his head, unable to speak. The image seared into his mind, a chilling premonition. It was a warning. Promise. It knew they were coming, and it was ready for them. Michael put the car in drive, pointing it back towards the highway, back towards the winding, isolated road that led to the Thorne estate. The moon, a mere sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, cast long, distorted shadows on the road ahead, stretching out like grasping fingers. Every mile they drove felt like a descent into madness, a journey into the very maw of their predicted doom. The house, dark and silent, awaited them, a monument to a forgotten evil now stirring to life, its ancient heart beating in anticipation. They were going back to face the painting, to face the entity, to face their own deaths. The final confrontation was at hand. The old house loomed before them, a black silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. It was a tomb, a cage, a place where destinies were etched in oil and canvas. The air grew colder with every footstep they took toward its decaying porch, the silence so profound it felt like a pressure against their ears. Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily moved as one, a silent pact of grim determination. Each carried the weight of their own painted death, a phantom limb of dread that twitched with every gust of wind. They were going to face it, to break the cycle, or to become another brushstroke in the entity's dark gallery. The front door, which had once swung open with a whisper of forgotten grandeur, now groaned like a dying beast as Michael pushed it inward. A wave of stale, frigid air rushed out to meet them, carrying with it the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something ancient and malevolent. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of shadows. Moonlight, fractured by grimy windows, cast long, distorted figures across the floor, making every corner seem to writhe with unseen menace. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the entity's expectant hum, a low, resonant vibration that thrummed beneath their skin. They didn't speak, their shared purpose a silent language. Their footsteps echoed on the grand staircase, each creak of aged wood a sharp punctuation in the oppressive quiet. Emily clutched the journal, its tattered pages a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. David's hand rested on the hilt of the ornate letter opener he'd brought, a symbolic weapon against an intangible foe. Jessica gripped Michael's arm, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed forward, refusing to be drawn into the swirling shadows. The studio door stood ajar, a sliver of pulsing, unnatural light spilling from within. It was a sickly, greenish glow like bioluminescent decay, and it beckoned them with a terrible allure. As they pushed the door open, the light intensified, revealing the studio transformed. The air was thick, charged with an almost physical presence, making it hard to breathe. Dust motes danced in the eerie luminescence, swirling like tiny, desperate souls. And there it was, the painting. It hung on the easel, no longer a mere canvas but a vortex of dark energy. The colors swirled and shifted within its frame, not depicting a scene, but rather a maelstrom of raw, malevolent power. It pulsed a slow, rhythmic beat like a monstrous heart. The faint images of their deaths, once clear, now seemed to flicker at the edges of the canvas, distorted, hungry. "It's stronger," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the low thrumming that now filled the room. As if in response, the entity lashed out. It wasn't a physical attack, not yet. It was a psychic assault, a direct invasion of their minds, twisting their deepest fears into hyperreal hallucinations. Michael gasped, clutching his chest. The room seemed to tilt violently. He felt the impossible pressure, the crushing weight against his ribs, the air being driven from his lungs. The ceiling above him began to descend, a massive concrete slab pressing down, down, down. He tasted dust, felt the splintering of bone, heard the sickening crack of breaking timber. He was trapped, utterly helpless, the cold, hard reality of his painted death engulfing him. Jessica stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. The floor beneath her vanished, replaced by a dizzying chasm. She was falling, tumbling through an endless void, the wind tearing at her, the ground rushing up to meet her from impossible depths. She saw the concrete floor of the mansion studio far below, growing closer, 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 ready to embrace her with bone-shattering force. Her scream caught in her throat, a silent, desperate plea. Emily felt a chill that pierced her very soul. The shadows around her coalesced, forming a towering, faceless figure that mirrored her own silhouette, but twisted, malevolent. It reached for her with spectral hands, a cold, suffocating grip that promised to drag her into an abyss of nothingness, to extinguish her light, her very consciousness. She felt herself fading, dissolving into the encroaching darkness, her identity unraveling. But it was David who bore the brunt of the entity's fury. The air around him shimmered, growing intensely hot. He cried out, stumbling back from the painting as if shoved by an invisible force. The studio walls flickered, replaced by roaring inferno. Flames licked at his skin, searing, consuming. He felt the acrid smoke fill his lungs, choking him, the agonizing burn of his flesh. He was consumed, utterly devoured by the fire, his painted death made horribly real, a terrifying premonition of his impending doom. No! Emily's voice, though strained, cut through the illusions. It's trying to break us. Focus. We have to fight it. She forced herself to look away from her own terrifying vision, her eyes fixed on the journal. Her hands trembled, but her resolve hardened. The ritual. She began to chant, her voice low and resonant, the ancient words echoing through the studio. They were words of defiance, of binding, of severing the ties between the seen and the unseen. As she spoke, a faint ethereal light began to emanate from the journal itself, pushing back against the oppressive darkness. Michael, fighting through the phantom weight on his chest, pushed himself forward, positioning himself beside Emily, a protective bulwark. Jessica, still trembling, forced her eyes open, her vision clearing enough to see the painting, its malevolent glow momentarily dimmed by the light from the journal. She placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, lending her strength. The entity shrieked, a sound that was not heard but felt, a piercing vibration that threatened to shatter their very minds. It intensified its assault on David, sensing his vulnerability, the raw, visceral terror of his fiery death. The flames around him roared louder, licking at his clothes, his hair. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his hands pressed against his face as if to ward off the unbearable heat. Emily, keep going. David choked out, his voice hoarse, ragged. It needs a catalyst, a way to sever the connection. His eyes, wide with a desperate understanding, darted toward the painting. He saw not just the fire, but the source of the fire, the entity's core, a swirling ember of dark energy within the canvas itself. And he saw his own painted death, not as an inevitability, but as a sacrifice, a way to reclaim agency, to turn the entity's power against itself. I see it, he yelled, pushing himself to his feet, his body trembling, but his eyes blazing with a newfound, terrifying resolve. It feeds on fear, on the acceptance of fate. We have to defy it. Before Michael or Jessica could react, David lunged forward, not toward the painting, but toward the entity's manifestation of fire that surrounded him. He knew his death was coming, but he would not let it be meaningless. He would not be a passive victim. With a guttural cry, he threw himself into the heart of the spectral flames, a human conduit, a living defiance. The studio erupted. David's body, consumed by the illusory fire, became a focal point of intense, raw energy. His act of self-sacrifice, of embracing his predicted end on his own terms, created a feedback loop, a violent surge of power that shocked the entity. The painting on the easel began to writhe violently. The colors bled, the canvas seemed to stretch and contort, as if in agony. Emily, seeing David's desperate act, understood. She poured every ounce of her will, every last shred of courage into the ancient words. Her voice rose, no longer trembling but powerful, resonant, echoing with the force of ages. The light from the journal flared, engulfing her, Michael, and Jessica in a protective glow. The entity shrieked again, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain and fury. It was a sound that tore at the very fabric of reality. The visions around them shattered like glass, revealing the studio once more. But it was a studio in chaos. Furniture flew across the room, windows exploded inward, shards of glass raining down like deadly tears. The very air crackled with destructive force. Then, with a final earth-shattering scream that seemed to rip through the dimensions, the painting on the easel exploded. Not in a burst of paint and canvas, but in a silent, implosive flash of brilliant, blinding light. For a moment, the entire room was bathed in an unbearable white, and then just as suddenly it was gone. The light, the entity, the oppressive darkness, all vanished. Silence descended, absolute and profound. The air, once thick with malevolence, was now clear, clean and strangely still. The studio was a wreck, but the pulsating, terrible energy was gone. The painting on the easel was no more. In its place was a blank, empty frame, devoid of canvas, devoid of color, devoid of the entity's dark influence. Michael, Jessica, and Emily stood amidst the debris, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling, their minds reeling. David was gone. There was no trace of him, only the lingering scent of ozone and ash. His sacrifice had been complete, his defiance absolute. He had chosen his death, and in doing so, he had saved them. They stumbled out of the mansion, into the pre-dawn hush, leaving the silent, empty frame in the shattered studio behind. The sky was beginning to lighten, a soft, hopeful blush of pink and gold on the horizon. The world outside felt different, sharper, more real. They had faced the abyss, and they had returned, but not unscathed. The painting was gone, the entity banished. Their predicted deaths, the horrifying visions that had haunted their every waking moment, were no longer an inescapable future. They had defied fate, or at least they had altered its course. But the victory was bittersweet, tainted by the heavy cost. David's sacrifice, his courageous act of defiance, would forever be etched into their souls. They had seen their deaths, and in that terrible knowledge, they had found the courage to fight. They had learned that fate was not a fixed tapestry, but a canvas that could be repainted, if one was brave enough to wield the brush, and perhaps to pay the ultimate price. The true horror wasn't just seeing death, but knowing it, and the choices one makes when faced with its chilling inevitability. The world was safe for now, but the echo of David's sacrifice, and the memory of what they had seen, would forever remind them of the fragile line between life and death, and the terrifying power of a painting that showed the viewer's end.